I'm going to tell you the story of how I got into body language and at the same time, one tip that's going to help you boost your persuasive skills. So it was 1991, CNC Music Factory was ruling the world. Point Break was one of the coolest things to happen to humanity, and the Soviet Union was about to be dissolved. But I was just a kid in high school who was trying to not die of trigonometry and organic chemistry. And as any kid of the 90s, I was a huge fan of video games. But sadly, Doom and the first-person shooter revolution was still 2 years away in the future. So meanwhile, I spent time with action and adventure games. And even before internet, playing adventure games was a social phenomenon. We shared install discs among friends, each one installed it at home and began grinding in the afternoons and sharing tips at school. It was fun because everyone helped collectively to finish those games. And at the time, it was not unusual for those games to compensate lack of complexity with the difficulty. We were also 2 years away from Myst, so it was not that bad yet. But I remember that two very close friends of mine started talking about this game called Countdown. I didn't pay much attention because at the time I was more into flying simulators, but I noticed a pattern, and it was that they never stopped talking about that game. Sharing tips, getting stuck in the same areas, then one of them came up with a solution, then both moved forward. It was like watching two mountain climbers helping each other with ropes. And then, suddenly, they stopped. And how do I know they stopped? Well, because as I'm telling you, they were really into this game, talking about it every day, so when they did not mention it anymore, I thought that they had finished it. So I asked them, did you finish that game, Countdown? And the reply was, no, we got stuck almost near the end. We have tried everything and nothing works. I remember that I asked them that question a Thursday, so I told them to bring me a copy of the game to try it for myself. So one of them brought that copy on Friday, and the first thing I did that afternoon after getting lunch was installing the game on my PC and playing throughout the weekend. Because trigonometry and organic chemistry could wait. So the premise of Countdown was very simple. You wake up in a psych ward and you don't remember anything about yourself, not even your own name. So as the game progresses, you discover that you are a special agent who was scheduled to be neutralized with a lobotomy, and meanwhile an international terrorist was planning to set up an explosive device in Paris in exactly 4 days. As you can imagine, you're the only one who can stop him, but you have to get your memories back first. And yes, first you have to escape this psych ward. Now you might be asking, what does any of this have to do with body language? And you can imagine that in 1991, we didn't have super powerful PCs, so video games needed to be fun with a rather simple gameplay. And in this case, Countdown was a point-and-click adventure in which you, quite literally, point at things on the screen and then select the action you want to apply to those things. But don't be fooled, sometimes you needed to do it with the right timing or you died in rather funny ways. There was a second mechanic that I had never seen in any other game before that, and it was conversations with the in-game characters. And how did you talk to them? Well, you didn't really have actual options in terms of words or sentences, but you have buttons for attitudes, as in ask about, offer, bluff, hassle, and a couple others. So to speak to them, you needed to lead the conversation by taking turns and choosing the attitude you thought was the most appropriate for each moment. Like, you had to adapt to the person's reaction and choose your next attitude accordingly. In that sense, a conversation was like a puzzle. You needed to find the right sequence of attitudes so you could solve what you needed from the person. But if we have 6 attitude options, then every step of the conversation would multiply the number of possible branches. So if a conversation had as few as 3 turns, then the number of possible outcomes would be 6 raised to the power of 3, which is 216 possibilities. The very last conversation of the game and the part where my friends got stuck required just 3 turns. And you can think that one could simply test every option, right? After all, how long could it take to go through all 216 tries? Well, the problem is that in each failed attempt, the Jackal, that was the name of the terrorist, not related to the Venezuelan Jackal, but I'm sure that he was a huge influence for the game's villain name. Well, with each failed attempt, the Jackal shoots you. It's game over. And that brings you to the most recent checkpoint. But to load the checkpoint, you had to go all the way to the loading screen. The whole process for another attempt was 2 to 3 minutes, so trying all 200 plus combinations would take around 10 hours of extremely boring gameplay. And no game was worth 10 hours of continuously loading a boring checkpoint, even if the game had been great up to that point. Now, you might already be guessing that if I'm telling you all this story is because I beat the game, right? And the answer is yes, I beat the game. This scenario of fooling the jackal so you could slide some sleeping pills into his tea took me around 10 minutes to beat. But how? How did I find the combination so fast? Well, I guess that if this was so close to the end, the programmers would have wanted to set up the most difficult conversation puzzle yet. And I had the intuition that if the whole game progression was so smooth up to that point, in the sense that every puzzle, whether conversational or physical, made sense, I didn't think that they would have gone for a 5-turn conversation, which would be over 7,000 possibilities. So this final puzzle couldn't be that long. So to make up for it, it must have included something misleading. The trick turned out to be in the hassle button. I mean, this guy shot you if you even breathed the wrong way, so most people would assume that you're not going to hassle someone so trigger happy, right? Well, it turns out that hassle was the second step of the conversation puzzle. The whole puzzle was bluff, then hassle, then ask for help. And that's how in 4 or 5 attempts I got through to the last stage of the game, which was defusing the actual bomb. Now, the funny thing is that I didn't know about the term body language or persuasion until much later, like 5 years later. But this game blew my mind in the sense that wouldn't it be great if conversations in real life could be like this? Or I don't mean with the risk of being shot, but people from Chicago could relate. I mean like having a code to unlock what you want from people just by following some steps. Like everyone in any circumstance had a cheat code to make them do what you want. And yeah, it sounds like a villain origin story, but in fact, that game mechanic sparked my interest in finding out how people work. Because when you find out how something works, in this case people, maybe you can predict how they're going to behave, right? But of course, this is not always possible, but the principle that you can analyze people's behavior and intentions, pay attention to what they say, and lead the conversation with the right questions, in my case, this was the start of it all. Now, I mentioned that this has one of the best lessons in terms of persuasion, and it has to do with the hassle thing. And you must know that ever since I was a kid, I was really shy and introverted, and I never really liked talking to people. The problem is that this insecurity led into being a people pleaser for many years, and you know that it never goes well. So if I was playing Countdown's conversation puzzles in real life, I would never use the hassle button. I would never include any sort of friction in my interactions with people. And that is wrong. Because what happens when you encounter someone who looks like they want to avoid conflict at all costs? It doesn't feel right. Now, it's not that they are trying to manipulate you, because they could be people pleasers out of insecurity. I was one of them, and it took me a lot to fix that. In fact, that's what most toxic personalities do right from the start. Maybe it's not full-on love bombing, but they try to make everything perfect around you. And that's why you should trust people in stages. Because what are the odds that they are so perfect around you? So I never forgot that to beat the jackal, I needed to include friction. I learned that actual persuasion comes from genuine human interactions. And maybe hassle is not the right word here. The right word here is being assertive, which means that you must make a stand for what you think is right and fair for yourself, even if it could create friction with the other person or make them uncomfortable. It's counterintuitive, but they will trust you more because of that. My body language buddies, don't forget to download my free 100 body language tips in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas, I'm the body language guy, and remember, much love and bliss.